Hello idealists and iconoclasts, my name is TB Skine, and there's been a bunch of new League of Legends lore released, specifically biographies for a bunch of the Ionian champions, Yasuo, Karma, Lee Sin, and also one for Riven, of all people, who seems to have been reclassified as much more of an Ionian champion than an Oxyan one, which is on its own quite interesting. However, IRELIA, besides getting herself a updated biography, has gotten herself a new color story. Those little, short stories that Riot release in order to try and explore the characters outside of the video game context. Now, it's been a while since I've done one of these videos on the writing of League of Legends, and a few people have asked about, oh, will you do stories for this or that, or will you do these things again? Because some people apparently find these videos useful, which I'm very happy to hear. I'm always worried that I'm just rambling on and on about stuff that people don't find interesting, but it's gratifying to be told that the criticisms I have are useful to someone. So let's take a look at this color story, talk about some of the themes, some of the stuff that it does for IRELIA's character, and some of the stuff it does for establishing the world building of Ionia, and let's try really, really hard to ignore the piece of concept art they've chosen as a background where apparently IRELIA's chest armor has been painted on to her skin to the point where I'm reasonably sure I can see the outline of her nipples through it, which I talk a lot about boot plate armor on this channel because it's a thing that comes up again and again in character design, and I'm kind of sick of it, and there's a lot of different opinions on it. Some people think it's totally cool and you shouldn't complain, but we can at least agree, all of us, that armor shouldn't be painted onto a person, because she literally cannot. If she bends over with those spikes poking like at her waist, if she bends over, she literally stabs herself in the gut. She literally can't bend over. So if you're designing armor, maybe don't design armor where the person will stab themselves to death if they attempt to move. Anyway, this short story deals with a few things about IRELIA. First of all, her characterization as someone who is vengeful and angry, certainly, and militant in her approach to solving the conflict between Ionia and Noxus, but also someone who is profoundly affected by self-doubt, who's very, very worried about her position as a leader for her people, and who's very worried about what all the killing is doing to the soul of the country. It also does a little bit of world building in terms of establishing what kind of country Ionia is, what kind of powers are at play, and it does a little bit to try and get us into the mindset of the Ionian people. And honestly, I think it does a reasonably good job. Something I've criticized Riot's short stories for before, and quite heavily, is that the writers tend to get overexcited, in the sense that this is just my outsider's impression of what it's like, but my sense of the writers at Riot is that they don't get a lot of opportunities to world build for League of Legends. They don't get a lot of opportunities to release stuff. Like, these short stories are pretty few and far between. It's relatively rare that there is a substantial written lore update. And so when the writers do get to update the lore, they tend to go overboard. They tend to throw in all kinds of special terminology and special language quirks and all kinds of special place names and special nouns that they've invented specifically for the world, and this is what a cart is called here, and this is what these stone obelisks have this special name in this history. And they tend to throw all of that into every single short story that they write, and it tends to choke them a little bit. It tends to overwhelm them, where all of this special terminology doesn't really do anything to enhance the story. So let me give you an example. I read a Star Wars Expanded Universe novel once upon a time, way long ago. I can't really remember much of it, but there was one phrase in it that stood out to me, where it said that someone's lightsaber, the phrase went something like, his lightsaber went through him like a neutrino laser through a ferrocrete bunker. Now, what the writer means to say is that the lightsaber goes through him like a hot knife through butter, which is a perfectly common idiom in the English language. But the writer looks at that perfectly common English idiom and goes, wait a minute, what if I replaced all the words that people understand with special terminology from inside the Star Wars universe? That would certainly make the phrase feel a lot more realistic, right? It would feel much more like something people in the Star Wars universe would say, right? So they replace understandable terminology with in-universe terminology which just overcomplicates what should be a simple phrase. It forces you in the middle of action when a lightsaber is cutting someone down to start thinking about, wait, what the hell is ferrocrete? And neutrino lasers, are they particularly powerful? Are ferrocrete bunkers really strong, or are they weak? And are neutrino lasers super powerful, or are they just... and you have to do all this kind of... You get taken out of it. And that kind of writing is prevalent in stories where the writer is desperate to world build, where the writer is desperate to show you just how much he has thought about this world, how many things he has invented for this world. He's a writer who's really desperate to say, no, I've thought about this. I've invented a whole history, and there's languages, and there's cultures, and there's all this stuff. I've got all this stuff I want to show you. So they shove it into every word and phrase that they can possibly fit it into. And it's not that that's wrong, necessarily. Like, it's a perfectly decent way to world build, to invent specific terminology and put it in there and make it feel like characters are speaking from a different life experience. That's fine. But it's easy to go overboard. And for me, at least, whenever I'm confronted with heaps and heaps of invented terminology, it takes me out of it. It reminds me that there's a writer here somewhere who has invented all this stuff, that it's not real, that it's fake. It's all fake stuff that's been invented by someone who has sat down and thought about it very carefully. And to me, that takes me out of the story. And I bring this up, this extended tangent, because that doesn't really happen in Stains on a Name. It's something I've criticized Riot Stories for a lot in the past. If you look up my videos on the Lux and Garen lore or the Jinx lore, I get very angry about it at times, actually. But here it's not there. This is a very straightforward story. It's written in a very simple set of understandable... It's written in an understandable vernacular, essentially. It doesn't really fuck around with trying to throw all kinds of special terms and terminology in there. And I want to bring that up because I've criticized Riot for it so heavily in the past, so I want to bring up, they haven't done it here. Good on them. Yay, I'm very happy. So, the basic outline of this story, and we're not going to read through all of it in turn because that would take way too long, but you should read it for yourselves. The basic outline is that Irelia is confronted by an assassin who she kills. And the death of this assassin, on top of all the other deaths that she has caused, is causing her to doubt herself. It's throwing her into self-doubt, and it's making her worried that all this bloodshed, all this conflict that she has led Ionia into, whether she meant to or not, is staining her soul and staining the soul of Noxus. Eventually, she meets an old lady who she talks to about all the death, all the strife and suffering, and the old lady kind of puts her mind at ease a little bit by telling her that things change, the old ways won't work forever, and it kind of strengthens Irelia's resolve and makes her a little bit more okay with proceeding. So there's a couple of interesting choices that are happening here. First of all, we open in medias res. That is to say, we open in the middle of the action. There's no intro, there's no, extended phrases setting up what the world looks like and who's here, and it was a bright sunny day and a nice spring morning when Irelia went down the street and so on and so forth. It just begins immediately. It begins with a line of dialogue. "I believed in you, Blade Dancer," the man choked, his lips frothing red. "You showed us the path." This is the assassin who Irelia has just bested in combat because he's really bad at fighting and she's extremely good at it. But something that's going on here is Irelia held her stance. She looked down at him, this devotee of the Brotherhood, on his knees in the mud. What is the Brotherhood? If you are a casual reader, if you're someone who's unfamiliar with League of Legends and you read this, the framing of the story tells you that the Brotherhood means something. Like, the Brotherhood is it's a special organization, and they want to kill Irelia because of some reasons we don't know. This is opaque to you. Like, you don't know what that means. If you do read League of Legends lore and you're into it, you know that the Brotherhood is Zed's Brotherhood. The Brotherhood of Shadows? I can't actually remember what they're called. And they are trying to murder Irelia because they feel like she has betrayed what they thought were the ideals that she stood for, in the sense that the Brotherhood is, as far as I can make out from the new conception of the lore, is a highly militant organization that wants to, well, militarize Ionia and take the fight to Noxus and take it back from perceived threats of whatever kind. So this is a creative choice. This is not right or wrong, but this phrase right here means that this story is only really accessible to League of Legends lore fans. It's only really accessible to people who already know what the Brotherhood is and what Ionia is and what's the relationship between those two things and why they might want to kill Irelia, because that is never explained at any point in this short story. It doesn't explain why they want to kill her, what they are, who is their leader, why do they exist, what are the politics of Ionia. That's never explained to you. You have to look to other sources than the short story for that. That's a choice that the writers have made with the presumption, I imagine, that whoever is reading these short stories is probably interested enough to also read a whole bunch of other League of Legends lore. That's a consideration about audience. My criticism is, I really feel like this stuff should be more accessible to casuals, in the sense that the story of League of Legends, the characters of League of Legends, like, a lot of people engage with the video game not necessarily through playing it, but by engaging with the characters, with the lore, with the relationships. Overwatch is a great example of this. This stuff should be accessible to anyone. Like, anyone should be able to pick up these short stories and read them. That's my opinion as a person. And making this choice to make it opaque to anyone who isn't a League of Legends lore buff, that sits a little bit off with me. Now, generally, this story is fairly well written. There's a few embellishments with, like, unnecessary language. For instance, Irelia held her stance. She looked down on him, this devotee of the Brotherhood, on his knees in the mud. He had been pierced over and over by her blades. Now, at this point, we have already been told he's choking on blood. He's on his knees in the mud. She held her stance, which tells us that she has recently been fighting. I think we can infer that she has probably stabbed him a lot of times, because he's bleeding and he's in the mud on his knees in front of her while she's holding her fighting stance. That kind of thing. There are some times when there are phrases that are like, they're restating a point over and over and over again. And it's sort of, yeah. So, the worst thing was, he wasn't the first. The first to try and kill her. Irelia's blades now hovered at her shoulders, following the graceful circling movements of her hands. One simple gesture and it could all be over. This one, again, is a little redundant because we already know he's at her mercy. He's bleeding in the mud on his knees in front of her. We don't need to tell. There's also this place. He was clumsy and awkward. She had danced around him easily. At this point, we know he's at her mercy. We know that she can kill him. Restating the point over and over again, it's just kind of weakened. So, I believed in you, he said. We all did. She sighed. I never asked you to. I'm sorry. That's quite a good phrase. Like, that tells us quite a bit about how Irelia thinks about herself, and how the world thinks about Irelia, that she is this person, this simple, who has been uplifted as as a rallying point for resistance against the Noxians. But, you know, nobody is the perfect hero that you imagine that they are, and when the disconnect between the reality of Irelia and the ideal of Irelia becomes clear, people become resentful and try to kill her. And Irelia's reaction to this is to sigh and apologize, but say, I never asked you to believe in me. And that tells us something about who Irelia is, how she thinks of herself. She doesn't think of herself as a symbol, as a war leader. She's kind of exhausted by it all. Yeah, here again, redundant words. Her limbs flowing lithely around her body, Irelia whirled to the side, sending the blades out in a deadly arc. They sliced cleanly through his flesh, as much an act of mercy as self-defense. Again, at this point, we know you're not defending yourself, because he on his knees in the mud with bleeding out of his mouth, and you have magic floating blades with which you can kill people. We get it. You're not defending yourself, you're just mercy killing him. We get it. And also, her limbs flowing lithely. Flowing lithely is redundant. Just say they're flowing. They're flowing around her body. Like, if movement is flowing, we understand that it is graceful, that it is lithe, that it is, you know. So, sending the blades out in a deadly arc. I'd say just Irelia whirled to the side in a deadly arc. Like, sending the blades out is, again, like, there's all this stuff where you could really delete a bunch of words and just make the phrase shorter. And especially for action scenes, especially for scenes that are meant to be kind of abrupt or brutal, the fewer words you use, the harder it tends to hit. if you use the more word, essentially, it's a matter of managing the time in the reader's mind. The more words and the more time you spend describing an action, the slower it moves in the head of the reader, generally. Right? Her limbs flowing lithely around her body, Aurelia whirled to the side, sending the blades out in a deadly arc. They sliced cleanly through his flesh, as much an act of mercy as self-defense. It's not that that's bad, but compare that to just saying Aurelia killed him. Like, that's a very different way to phrase that. And it takes much fewer words and you accomplish the same thing. So it's a matter of thinking about how do you want that action to play in the reader's mind. And here, because of all these descriptions, that makes it sound like it's a lyrical action. Like, it's in a movie, this feels like it would be happening in slow motion. And I feel more like she's killing someone who's already essentially dead. She's mercy killing him. I don't think that should be slow and dramatic. I think that should be, with a flick of her wrist, Aurelia ended his suffering. Like, that would feel more appropriate to me in this case. Now, as you've probably noticed by now, if you've watched for this long, I nitpick a lot. That's really the point of these videos, is to take a look at how the writing is working and try and figure out, with whatever expertise I have, how could we improve it? How could we make it better? Her burden was heavy as she returned to the camp. Is a weird way to phrase that. She returned to the camp exhausted, weary, burdened, feeling burdened, but her burden was heavy as this is passive language, right? And active language is, I don't subscribe to the notion that you should always use active language and all passive language is bad, but when you're using passive language, there needs to be a reason for it, and her burden was heavy as she returned to the camp. When she finally entered the privacy of her tent, she released a long, tense breath and lowered herself to the reed mat. See, you could kind of cut this out. When she finally entered the privacy of her tent, she released a long, tense breath and lowered herself to the reed mat. At this point, we get the sense that she's exhausted, that she's kind of, okay, good lord, that was, oh god, I hate what's going on. So, adding this on again is superfluous. It's, yeah, we get it. Of course she's burdened by it. We've already seen she's sighing, I never asked you to, I'm sorry. As much she's sighing, I never asked you to, I'm sorry. She kills him as a mercy. And like, she's already kind of exhausted, and we've already been communicated this multiple times. There's no need to restate it. Father, she whispered, forgive me, I have bloodied our family's honor once more. I have bloodied our family's honor. Again, it's an unnecessarily flowery phrase. I have shamed our family. I have shamed our family again. And this is a question of, do all people in Ionia speak in these terms? Do they speak in this poetic, heightened type of language? I have bloodied our family's honor once more. That's not, most people don't talk like that. And Aurelia, as far as I could tell from her biography, is not nobility. She's not some highfalutin fancy nobleman's daughter kind of thing. She's just like a girl from Ionia. So, does everybody in Ionia speak this way? And if they don't, that's a question of consistency. I would like, in other stories that take place in Ionia, I would like to know who talks like that and when they do it. Because later on in the story, she meets this old lady who's sitting under a tree, right? And who's just kind of chilling there, and who gives her a little bit of a pep talk. And this lady talks, ain't much room left around here, but any friend of yours is a friend of ours. Helps keep my mind off bad things, right? I'm sure you did all you could. Besides, this is all part of the spirit's way, you know? Like, this is a very vernacular. This, to me, when I read these phrases, they sound American, a little bit, maybe a little bit Southern, because this woman they're trying to characterize her as being a little bit more down to earth, a little bit more normal. So why is it that Aurelia in private talks to her dead father like with these, instead of saying, Dad, I'm so sorry, she says, Father, I have bloodied our family's honor once more, forgive me. Instead of saying, Dad, I'm so sorry, I keep doing this. Like, I hope you're not ashamed of me. Like, and these are nitpicks, again, but this is something that's kind of, if you really want to world build by using the language, That's the kind of thing I think you should think about, is how do these people talk? When do they talk in these ways? Like, does everybody speak in poetic terms because that's just the way the language happens to shake out in this country, or do they only do it in certain situations? So, some good stuff that's going on here, however. I like that this story is not about Irelia fighting. That is not about her being out on the battlefield murdering people and cutting them down. Because that's something a lot of writers will try to do, is try and establish this ironic juxtaposition where the warrior is doing badass shit in battle and killing people and being cool, but then at the same time they're feeling sad and conflicted about their role in the combat. Like, you intercut these scenes of tremendous violence and badass fighting skill with the warrior sort of in their own head being self-doubtful and sad about all the people they have to kill, and I'm so and that to me always creates a weird tension, because most of the time the writer, or indeed the filmographer, the director in a movie who's trying to do this, will still want to present the action as cool and badass, while at the same time also spending a lot of emotional time being like, oh, but violence is wrong and it's bad and it's sad that these people are dying in totally badass ways. That's something that kind of annoys me. So what I really like about the concept of the story is that Irelia has this time, this moment of self-reflection and of doubt and of pain, not after winning a cool-ass battle and taking away, like, driving away evil Noxians who were murdering women and children and doing something that is objectively good. She has this low point, this moment of doubt and fear after she has killed a clumsy assassin in the mud who had no chance against her whatsoever, and who she just basically has to kill because she can't save him. Like, this grimy, ugly, unpleasant moment. She's not a badass, she's not cool. She just kills a dude who can't defend himself. And that, by the way, is also why I was a little bit annoyed by this, her limbs flowing lithely around her body. Irelia World is like, this is kind of fetishizing the moment of the kill. Like, this is talking about how badass she looks while she kills a dude in the mud who can't defend himself, right? It's that tension I was talking about, with where the writer can't help but try and make their protagonist look badass at the same time as they're trying to question the validity of the methods that the protagonist is employing, and that stuff doesn't work for me. So there's that's part of why I was annoyed by this particular point, but I really like the concept of, like, it's not the death of a battlefield that brings her to a low point. It's the fact that one of her countrymen tries to assassinate her, like, in some random village, and he dies in the mud for it. Like, the blades would never be clean. That too is a very good. I really like that as a place of conception, that Irelia has this complicated relationship with her weapons where she cleans them and they are the symbol of her family's honor. If you read her new biography, her sword blades, those floating weapons that she uses, are fragments of her family's crest, like the very symbol of her family, and the standard for her family's honor, which was shattered by some evil Noxians who are assholes, and she has the magic power to manipulate those blades and make them fly around and kill people. So she has this complicated relationship where she's literally using her family's name, her family's symbol, to murder people. Not just on the battlefield, but also in the mud on their knees when they can't defend themselves. So she has this ritual where she cleans the blade every time. She wants them to be clean, but the blades would never be clean. Like, in her mind, she feels that there's nothing she can really do that will ameliorate the sins that she's committing by literally using the last remaining piece of her family that she has left to murder with. That's a really strong concept, and that's the kind of thing that makes me interested in Irelia as a character, like that complex relationship with the very weapons that define her. She's the blade dancer. The blades are incredibly important to her, so her having this really emotionally fraught relationship with them, I quite like that. I don't think... I have listened to all of Irelia's voice lines because they get put out as skin spotlights. I don't really think that relationship is reflected in her voice lines in-game, which I feel like is kind of a missed opportunity, but nonetheless, having it a part of her lore, That's really cool. If they ever release more Irelia lore, I would love to see that stuff explored better. So, yeah, more moments of self-doubt. Though they look to Irelia for leadership now more than ever, she recognized few of them, with each winter, the faces became less familiar as the last of the old resistance were replaced by new and more zealous fighters. They came from faraway provinces and towns she'd never heard of. Here again, it's like you could probably replace that by just saying she passed many of her followers on her way to the burial grounds, recognizing fewer of them year by year. Instead of kind of, with each winter, the faces became less familiar as the last of the old resistance were replaced. Like, that's over-explaining it, and I think you could imply the same thing with fewer words. Yeah, here's a good one. Finding an open patch beneath the blossom-heavy branches of a tree. Again, beneath the branches of a tree. Beneath the blossoms of a tree. The blossom-heavy branches is an unwieldy phrase. Irelia set him down carefully and turned to join in the grief of the widows and widowers, the orphan sons and daughters. That phrase, however, is very good. It flows really nicely. The grief of the widows and the widowers, the orphaned sons and daughters. That sounds like a song lyric. That's a really good phrase. I know it is never easy, she said, placing a consoling hand on the shoulder of one man who knelt before a pair of fresh graves, but each life and each death are part of... He batted away her hand, glaring at her until she retreated. That is a really good moment, where Irelia is trying to be the leader. She's trying to instill strength in her people, and we must soldier on in the face of these terrible losses and so on. And he's just like, fuck off. I'm mourning someone who's dead. Fuck off. This is not the time to be talking to me. And that's all communicated with nothing. He batted away her hand, glaring at her until she retreated. I like that, because that also, again, speaks to the primary theme of the story, which is how Irelia sees herself and how the world sees Irelia. So that's a really good little piece to have in there. Something I don't understand, though, is why, at this point, the story becomes italics. I don't know if it's supposed to signify we're going into a flashback or something, or maybe it's just a formatting error. So I imagine that it's not really. She has this speech to herself like, it's necessary, it's all necessary. The Brotherhood would grip this land in an iron fist no better than Noxus. Again, here is that little moment of explanation telling us something about who the Brotherhood is, which would nonetheless, like, this comes way too late from here where the Brotherhood is introduced. A casual reader would not get this far. They would be like, I don't know what the fuck is going on here, and they'd peace out. So she meets this old woman under a tree who talks about... who's connected... By the way, I did not know this man, but think you deserved better than he was given in life. Irelia took an uncertain step closer. You were singing one of the old songs. So this phrase here tells us as readers that, okay, this old woman is connected to the traditions of Ionia. She's someone she's old, first of all, which is always, you always connect old people to the traditional, to being more connected to the culture of a country because they've been there longer. And she was singing one of the old songs. So this is someone who is an authority on the culture of Ionia, on the past of Ionia, on the history of Ionia, in the sense that she's an elder. She's someone with more experience. This is part of the role that she's meant to play. And I bring that up because that's a good way to introduce someone who you want to say is connected to the world. You're singing one of the old songs. Old folk songs are a really useful symbol. A character who knows old folk songs is going to know something about the culture of the world that you place them in. That's a good way to introduce it. And the old woman stood trying in vain to open a large nut. Child, I remember peace well, she said, thrusting one gnarled, knobby finger at Irelia. Those were good days. Nobody misses peace more than me. She pulled a knife from her belt and began to pry open the nutshell. But the world's a different place now. What worked then don't work today. No point dwelling on it. At last the shell cracked and she placed the broken kernel into a bowl on the grave. See there? Used to be able to open these with my hands alone. Now I need a knife. The young me would have fretted about it, damaging the nut like that. But that me don't matter, because she don't have to live in the here and now. The old woman nodded kindly, then went back to her singing. This is actually really quite good. This is really quite good, because this encapsulates the tension in Aurelia and the conflict that rages inside her, that she is worried that she's poisoning the soul of Ionia by introducing it to warfare, by introducing it to the notion that it can use violence to defend itself rather than the pacifist methods that are favored by Karma and the spiritual leaders. And this old woman puts it in relatively pragmatic terms that times change, and as the world changes, you can't keep relying on the old tools. Like, used to be able to open these with my hands alone, now I need a knife. That's really, that's very good encapsulating. Used to be able to open these with my hands alone, now I need a knife. A knife is a weapon. It's something that you can use to kill with. Used to be, I didn't used to need to kill, now I need a knife. Like, that's a really good... I'm struggling to think whether allegory or parable would be the better way to describe it. That's a really good way to encapsulate the theme of the story, and that's what I really liked about this thing at the end. That she knew it would never be clean, never be whole again, but they were always ready, and that would have to be enough. Like, it has to be enough for her that, yes, her family honor is stained, but at least she can use the swords to defend people when they need them. Like, that pragmatic sense of purpose. That's quite good. And it's also very good for setting Aurelia in stark contrast to Karma. If you've read her new lore update with her new biography, Karma is someone who is essentially the Dalai Lama of League of Legends. She's someone who reincarnates into a new body over and over again, and the newest Karma faced the invasion of Noxus and used violence one time to try and kill one commander in order to make the Noxians turn back, and she killed out like an entire army because she was just too powerful and she couldn't control it. And she decided, because of her exposure to violence, in the same way that Aurelia has experienced that she has killed a whole lot of people and there's violence upon violence and death upon death upon death, Aurelia's reaction is to say, well, these are the necessities of the new world, where Karma reacts to it by saying, holy shit, this is way too far, and she retreats into a monastery and refuses to use violence ever again. So in terms of setting up the contrast between Aurelia and Karma as leaders of Ionia, that's very efficient. Anyway, I think that's about all I had to say on this story. I think it's quite good. I mean, I've been nitpicking it the whole time, and I just goddamn boot plates. But I really quite liked it. This is an interesting take on Aurelia. This is someone who has an internal conflict, but who isn't like just a sad, mopey, emo person. And I quite enjoy that. I really want Riot to put out more lore content, animated shorts, audio plays, comics, anything, whatever the hell they can do, because I see glimpses of brilliance in here, glimpses of really cool, interesting characters and interesting cultures. And I just want them to actually go and explore it somewhat. Anyway, my name has been TV Skyn. Feel free to leave your questions down in the comments down below. You should also feel free to hit the like button if you want, or the dislike button, that's okay, or subscribe. You can subscribe. I do videos like this. I do videos on a bunch of other stuff like animation and art and character design and things. And hit the bell. That's apparently, you have to hit the bell. That's YouTube rules. You have to hit the bell. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.